Triangle proofs, day 1. Alright, we're going to first take all the steps for a triangle proof and then go back and look at 2 examples and see if we can follow the steps. So the first 4 slides are going to be the steps that it takes. Now I want you to make sure that you understand that in every triangle proof the steps are going to be different, meaning that there could be 4 to 6 steps depending on how much is in the given. So we're going to start with just step number 1. So step number 1 is going to be obviously to read the given, and I want you to mark all the congruent parts. So read the given and mark all congruent parts. Now in a triangle, how many congruent parts can you have? Like how many are the ones that we showed in our shortcuts? There's always going to be 3. So when you mark all congruent parts, there's going to be 3. Okay, so always have that in mind. Okay, in addition, if something is tricking you up, always look for vocabulary that's in the given. So look for vocabulary words like you might have perpendicular or midpoint, but the vocab will help you to mark the parts. Another thing that will also help will be to look for reflexive and vertical. And we just went over that, so hopefully you remember what that means. Look for reflexive and vertical to help you mark. So the first thing you want to do is look at the given, read the given, and mark all congruent parts. There should be 3 of them by the time you're done. Okay, once you do that, you are going to start writing your proof. So step 2 will be to start your 2-column proof. And if you forgot what a 2-column proof looks like, I have it right down here. Okay, and the first step with every proof, of course, is to write down the given. So, write the given. And then when you write the given down, you want to take note of how many congruent symbols do I have. Because this is going to be important as to how many steps you're going to have. The more congruent symbols, the less steps. So you want to ask yourself, how many congruent symbols do I have? How many are you supposed to have? How many parts are always equal? If we are looking at triangles being equal, there needs to be 3. This is your magic number. Okay, so if there's not 3, then that's kind of what we have to do next. Okay, step 3 is going to be depending on how many congruent symbols you have. So the next 1 to 3 steps will depend on your congruent symbols. So the next 1 to 3 steps will be naming congruent parts. So the congruent parts that you marked. Again, the next 1 to 3 steps will be naming congruent parts that you marked in picture, but not in the given. Okay, and that'll make a lot more sense once we get to an actual example. This right here is probably the most difficult step. That's why I have a little picture saying, help me, help me. It'll get easier, I promise. Alright, the very last step then, once you mark those parts, the final step is going to be to have a triangle congruent statement. So final step is to list the triangle congruent statement. And if you forgot what a triangle congruent statement is, which we kind of just went over this too, it looks like this down here that I circled. So your triangle congruent statement is triangles blah 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 is congruent to triangle blah blah blah. And the reason then is always those 4 that we talked about earlier. So the reason is either ASA, SAS, SSS, or AAS. Those are the 4 possible combinations of 3 letters. If your picture is marked in any other way, like with AAA or SSA, aka ASS, then you mark something wrong and you need to go back and fix it. All right, let's look at an example. So you're now looking at your triangle proof worksheet number 1, but we're actually going to start with number 2 first because number 2 has less steps. So I'm going to start you out slow, easy, and then we'll get into some more difficult ones. Okay, so let's look at our steps. So have your steps next to you and we'll have our example page next to us. So the first step says that we want to use the given and we want to mark all the congruent parts. So here's our given. So I know that EH is congruent to FG. Those are segments, so you have to use the slashes. EH is congruent to FG, so you have 1 slash by those. Then you also know that EF is congruent to HG. You can't use the same marks, you got to use different marks because it's a different statement. So now we're going to use 2 marks by EF and 2 marks by HG. So these are the 2 that they gave us. So in the steps that you just wrote down, it says use the given, also use reflexive or vertical if you can mark anything else. We need to have 3 things marked. Right now we only have 2. So do you see anything else that we could mark? Hopefully you're saying to yourself, I see reflexive right here because they share this side. So this is the 3rd piece that we're going to mark. So you are actually done with the problem. Now you just need to explain everything that you just did. So let's start with our 2-column proof. Now I'm just going to abbreviate to make things a little easier. You know, not that I'm lazy, it's just called efficiency. So we're going to write down our given first. EH is congruent to FG and EF is congruent to HG. And your reason is given. Okay, so here's the tricky part. The next step that says, I'm still on step 2, start a 2-column proof, write down the given. How many congruent symbols are listed? So if you look here, we only have 1, 2 congruent symbols listed. We have to have 3 to finish this picture. Now we have 3 in our picture. Which one haven't we listed in our proof yet? Hopefully you're saying to yourself, we have not listed the reflexive. We haven't listed this one in the middle right here. So we need to list that in our explanation. So do you remember how we list reflexive? Because reflexive means that it's equal to itself. Remember the properties of algebra? So that segment is named EG. So EG would be congruent to EG. It's congruent to itself because EG is in this triangle here and it's in the bottom triangle here. So this is your reflexive statement. So now you have 3 triangle parts listed. So you are basically done. We just need to list our proof. So what you were trying to prove is right here. We're trying to prove that triangle EFG is congruent to triangle GHE. So since we just proved it, because we marked 3 parts, what's the pattern that these parts are marked in? Hopefully you're saying to yourself, well, this is SSS, it's all sides. So the reason that these 2 triangles are congruent right here is because of SSS. And that is a triangle proof. Alright, so this is the shortest one you can have because it has 3 steps. So let's do one that has 4 steps. Okay, we're going back to example number 1. So back at example number 1, let's go through the steps again slowly together to try to get the hang of this. So the first thing back at the steps you wrote down is to read the given and mark all congruent parts. So here's our given. The only thing that they tell us is congruent is right here. AD is congruent to CD. So AD is congruent to CD. I'm going to mark using 1 slash because it's a side. Okay, now what else do they give us? They give us that AC, and hopefully you know what that symbol is, it means perpendicular to BD. What does perpendicular mean? Hopefully you're thinking to yourself, perpendicular means 90-degree angles. So if AC down here is perpendicular to BD, your right angles are right there. So we're going to go ahead and mark that because they told us right here that it's perpendicular, which means it's 90. So we can go ahead and assume. It's okay to assume here. Okay, how many parts do we have marked right now? We got 2 parts marked. We got the green slashes and we got the right angle. So what else are we missing that we could mark in here? Well, if you look back at your list, it says that you can also look for reflexive or vertical. There's reflexive right here. Wham, wham. So now we have our 3 parts marked. Now we can start writing our proof. It'll be a lot easier. Okay, so again, statements, reasons, got our column. Okay, step number 2 in the steps you just wrote down says to start writing the 2-column proof, write down the given. So our given says that AD is congruent to CD and AC is perpendicular to BD. And the reason was given. All right. Next question I ask you on the steps says, how many congruent symbols are listed? You must have 3. So if you look at the given right now, there is only 1 congruent symbol. So how many congruent symbols do we still need? Hopefully you're saying to yourself, we need 2 more. We have to have 3 in order to complete the proof. So the next 2 steps are going to be congruent statements. We have to explain what we marked and why. So this AD is CD, the green ones we already explained. So now we need to explain the yellow 90-degree angles. So the yellow 90-degree angles, we want to give a congruent statement. So we want to show this angle right here is congruent to this angle over here. So we're going to say angle ADB is congruent to angle CDB. And why is it congruent? Why did we say that those were right angles? What was the reason? Because they gave us that we have perpendicular. So this is going to be the definition of perpendicular, and you can write it just like that to abbreviate it. Alright, so now we've explained the green slashes, we explained the right angle, so now we need to explain the middle piece here that we haven't explained yet, which is the reflexive piece that we just did. So if you remember, you have to name the segment, so the segment is BD, is congruent to BD, because of reflexive, it works in both triangles. Alright, so now we have 1, 2, 3 congruent symbols. We've explained all 3 parts that we've listed as congruent. We're done. We can now list the proof statement. So the last step, step number 4, is going to be the proof statement. So triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD. And how did you mark this picture? What's the pattern that you marked? And hopefully you're thinking to yourself SAS. So these 2 triangles are congruent by SAS. Alright, now again, those are some easier examples, and hopefully you followed along a little bit. We will definitely do some more practice. We'll finish on with 3, 4, and 5 right now. Whew, that was a close call. Hopefully you're not too lost and you'll be able to at least pick up on a few steps from here until proof video number 2.